You hear it before you understand it. A sound like green wood splitting, but wetter. A crack, then a hiss, then something underneath both that you will carry in your ears for weeks. Smithfield, London. The air is thick with pine pitch and tallow, sweet and greasy, the kind of smoke that clings to wool and skin and doesn't wash out. This is the moment that created Bloody Mary. You feel the heat on your face from 30 feet away. Not gradual, not building, but sudden, like someone opened a furnace door. Look straight ahead. There's a man tied to a wooden stake. His name is John Rogers. He is 49 years old. He has a wife. He has 11 children. One of them is an infant in her mother's arms. Rogers is singing psalms. He does not stop singing until the fire reaches his mouth. The queen who ordered this is Mary Tudor, England's first queen regnant. It's February 4th, 1555, a Tuesday morning in England. This is what we do here. We go back to the moment everything broke, and this one breaks harder than most. One man turned her into a monster after her death, and everyone believed him. But the story starts long before the fires. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable, because this wasn't unusual. Across much of Europe, burning heretics was considered a legal punishment. Catholic and Protestant rulers did it alike. Henry VIII did it. Edward VI's government did it. The difference is that only one Tudor monarch got a nickname for it. What most people know about Mary Tudor is only part of the story. The real story was buried, and it changes everything. This story doesn't start with fire. It starts with betrayal. You've heard the name Bloody Mary. You think you know this woman. You don't. What I'm about to show you comes from ambassadorial dispatches, royal correspondence, and documented accounts, not Hollywood scripts or horror legends. By the end of this, you'll see why Mary wasn't the villain. England needed her to be one, and why that changes how you see every fire she lit. This is the story of how England took its brightest princess, broke her into pieces, handed her a crown, and then blamed her for what the pieces did. Rewind. February 18th, 1516. Greenwich Palace, Catherine of Aragon gives birth to a girl, red-haired, pale-eyed, the only surviving child Henry VIII and Catherine will ever produce. 5 pregnancies before this one ended in miscarriage, stillbirth, or death within weeks. This child lives. Henry wanted a son, but he is not yet the monster he will become. He calls her the greatest pearl in the kingdom. Catherine pours everything into this child, the best tutors, the best education money can buy. By 4, Mary plays the virginals well enough to impress visiting ambassadors. By 9, she speaks Latin. By 15, foreign diplomats call her extraordinary. She was everything England wanted, until England wanted something else. By the mid-1520s, Henry sends her to preside over her own court at Ludlow Castle. She is the heir to England, the most accomplished princess in Europe. Her father adores her, her mother protects her. Her future looked certain. It wasn't. But none of that would save her. 1533. Henry wants a male heir. Catherine can't give him one. So he declares his marriage to Catherine void, breaks with the Catholic Church, crowns himself supreme head of the Church of England, and marries Anne Boleyn. In a single year, he dismantles everything: his marriage, his church, and his daughter's entire world. Put yourself there for a second. You're 17, you're Catholic, your mother has just been erased from the royal record, and overnight you go from Princess of Wales to nobody. Your title, stripped, your household dissolved, your servants dismissed. Then came the cruelest part. Mary was sent to serve as lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn's newborn daughter. The baby's name was Elizabeth. Mary, the former heir to England, was now carrying belongings for the infant who had replaced her. She dressed the baby. She attended the baby. She watched her father's new world orbit around a child that was not her. This wasn't anger. This was strategy. This was Henry at his coldest. The Spanish ambassador reported that Mary was frequently ill, that her physician blamed it on her treatment, and that she feared for her life. She didn't become a monster. She was being built into one. And that should have broken her. It didn't. And this is where it gets worse. 1536. Catherine of Aragon dies. Mary is not allowed to visit her, not allowed to attend the funeral. She hasn't seen her mother in 5 years. Catherine dies alone. Mary grieves alone. Then Henry presents her with a document. He doesn't just take her title. He makes her sign that she was never a princess, that her mother's marriage was a lie, that she was illegitimate, a bastard, not royal, never royal. Mary refuses. For weeks, she refuses. The ambassador writes to Emperor Charles V, describing intimidation so severe that Mary feared execution. The historian David Loades, in Mary Tudor, A Life, documents the campaign to break her will. She signs. June 1536. She is 20 years old, and that moment never left her. We'll never know for certain what passed through her mind. But she wrote afterward that she had signed under duress, that it meant nothing before God. Read that again. Her father forced her to deny her own mother's marriage, the marriage that made Mary legitimate. That made her royal, that made her matter. And she put her name to a document that said none of it was real. This is where Mary Tudor ends, and Bloody Mary begins. And for a moment, England moved on. But Mary didn't. At this point, she is legally a nobody. No title, no mother, no safety. Remember that, because what she does next will follow her for 500 years. Most people think history is about what happened. It's not. It's about what survived. And what survived of Mary Tudor is a lie. And this is the part that changes everything. Because in her world, heresy wasn't an opinion. It was a crime. And the punishment had one endpoint: fire. In 1554, Parliament reinstated the heresy laws, first enacted in 1401, now restored. The accused were tried, and if found guilty, handed over to burn. Here's what no one wants to say out loud. Mary and her Archbishop, Cardinal Reginald Pole, didn't see this as cruelty. In their world, this wasn't madness, it was justice. Burning the body for a few minutes could save the soul from burning in hell for eternity. The fire was medicine. The stake was compassion. That is the logic that lights 290 fires. And it is more terrifying than madness, because it is perfectly rational. And that's still not the part that destroyed her. But here is where the story refuses to be simple. Mary wasn't just broken, she fought back. They tried to replace her before she even reached the throne. When Edward VI died in 1553, they put Lady Jane Grey on the throne instead. Mary was supposed to disappear. Instead, she rode to Framlingham Castle in Suffolk, built an army from nothing, and marched on London. Jane Grey lasted 9 days. Mary took the crown by force of will. No woman had ever ruled England in her own right before. When they told her to flee London during an armed rebellion in 1554, she rode straight into it. She delivered a speech at the Guildhall so powerful that 20,000 men rallied to her side. She told London she was wedded to the realm, that the spousal ring was on her finger and would never come off. And then she said 6 words that would haunt her reign. I was never the mother of any. She didn't know how prophetic that would be. Imagine this. You're 38 years old. You've survived your father's attempts to erase you. You've taken a throne men tried to steal. You've married Philip of Spain, 11 years younger, a political match, not a love story. And now your body tells you what you've waited your entire life to hear. You're pregnant. Your belly swells. Your breasts produce milk. Your menstruation stops. Physicians confirm it. Ambassadors write home. The Queen is with child. Letters announcing the royal baby are pre-printed. Blank spaces left for date and sex. A royal nursery is prepared at Hampton Court. The entire country holds its breath. Church bells are readied. Bonfires are prepared. A rumor spreads that a prince has been born. Crowds celebrate in the streets. Then something goes wrong. There is no child. Weeks pass. Months. The belly shrinks. The milk dries. By August, the 11th month, you emerge from confinement, impossibly thin, utterly silent. Her body did something almost impossible. It created a pregnancy that wasn't real. Every symptom, the swelling, the milk, the movements, all of it without a child. Modern medicine calls it pseudocyesis. It occurs in roughly 1 to 6 out of every 22,000 pregnancies. Mary experienced it again in 1557. She died childless in 1558. Those who embalmed her, as Dr. Lindsay Fitzharris documents, found no tumor, no mass, no explanation. Her body had lied to her twice. And that should have been the end of her story. But it wasn't. The throne passed to Elizabeth, the baby she had once been forced to serve. The phantom child was gone. The real fires, the ones that would define her forever, had already happened. And now, history would decide what to do with them. That sound you heard at the beginning? This is where it comes from. And this is the part history doesn't tell you. 1555 to 1558. 290 people burned at the stake under Mary's authority. One burning every 6 days for 3 straight years. Men, women, tradesmen. Some burned alongside their spouses. This is the fact that defines her, and it is real. But here's what nobody tells you. Some contemporary sources claimed Henry VIII executed tens of thousands. Holinshed's Chronicles estimates 72,000. Even if exaggerated, the documented number is in the thousands. Elizabeth I executed around 189 Catholics, by hanging, not burning. As historian Linda Porter observes, the distinction is not moral, it is visual. Burning produces images, hanging does not. This was legal, this was normal, this was England. So how do you explain why only Mary got the nickname? But none of this is why you remember her. One man, one book, that's the answer. John Foxe opposed burning heretics on principle. When Mary's persecutions began, he fled to the continent, and he began writing. In 1563, Foxe published Actes and Monuments, 57 woodcut illustrations, 30 depicted burnings under Mary, detailed, graphic, visceral. Here is the detail that changes everything. In 1571, the Church of England ordered that Foxe's book be placed in every cathedral in England. Parish churches followed. Foxe's book went through 4 editions in his lifetime, a staggering bestseller by 16th century standards. For nearly a century, every English person who walked into a church found 2 books side by side, the Bible and Foxe's Book of Martyrs. God's Word on one shelf, Mary's victims on the other. As historian Anna Whitelock writes in Mary Tudor, England's first queen, Foxe's account shaped the narrative of Mary's reign for the next 450 years. Generations of English children grew up seeing those woodcuts before they could read. Strip everything away, and this is what remains. Henry executed thousands. No one drew it. Elizabeth executed 189. No one illustrated it. Mary burned 290. One man drew every flame, and they put his drawings next to the Bible. History didn't remember her. It edited her. Foxe didn't invent the story. He turned it into something no one would ever question. Bloody Mary wasn't born in a palace. She was born in a printing press. But by then, the real Mary was already gone. Mary died on November 17th, 1558. She was 42. Her last words, according to tradition: "When I am dead and opened, you shall find Calais lying in my heart." Elizabeth took the throne within hours. The burning stopped immediately. The heresy laws were repealed. Every policy Mary fought for was undone before her body was cold. Everything she had burned for, every fire, every trial, every screaming body at the stake, gone in a day. Philip, the husband she endured everything for, didn't return for the funeral. The Venetian ambassador reported he'd already been considering marrying Elizabeth. The man she married to produce a Catholic heir was planning his next marriage before the old one ended. And here's what makes this story unforgivable. And Foxe's book did its work. Within a generation, Bloody Mary was an identity. The girl who played the virginals at 4, who spoke Latin at 9, who rallied 20,000 men with a single speech, all of it erased. The greatest pearl in the kingdom, rewritten as a villain in a book she never got to answer. 5 centuries later, her name is a cocktail ordered at 11 a.m. by people who have never heard of Smithfield or Foxe, or a girl who was forced to dress the baby who replaced her. And the worst part? In trying to save England, she helped create the version of herself history would never forget. Here is the irony history produced, so complete it feels engineered. Mary wanted to restore Catholicism to England. Every fire she lit was meant to burn Protestantism out of the English soul. Instead, she created the single most powerful argument for Protestantism that England would ever know. Every martyr she made became proof that Catholicism was dangerous. Every flame became a reason to stay Protestant. The persecutions didn't destroy the new faith, they sanctified it. Foxe's book worked like a 16th century media campaign, except it ran for 100 years and was shelved next to God. She wanted to erase Protestantism. She made it permanent. She wanted to be remembered as the queen who saved England's soul. She is remembered as the queen who burned it. Modern historians increasingly use a different name. Not Bloody Mary, Broken Mary. They called her Bloody Mary, but before the blood there was a girl, red-haired, pale-eyed, playing the virginals for ambassadors who wrote home that she was extraordinary, a girl whose father called her the greatest pearl in the kingdom, and then told her she was nothing, who was separated from her mother and never saw her again, whose body produced milk for a child who didn't exist. 290 people were burned under her rule. That is real. But her father stripped her title, her name, her mother, her faith. Her husband abandoned her. Her body betrayed her. And then a man with a printing press rendered what remained in woodcut flames and placed those flames next to the Word of God. Henry killed thousands and got a dynasty named after him. Elizabeth killed 189 and got an age. Mary burned 290 and got the only nickname that stuck. The fire didn't start with her. It ended with her. But she's the only one we remember. You hear it before you understand it. A name repeated so many times it lost its meaning. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. But underneath the blood, if you listen, there's another sound. Quieter, older, not fire, not flame. Something breaking underneath it. If you want the real version of history, not the one that survived, but the one that was buried, subscribe. And if you think this is the worst thing England did to a queen, it isn't. That's next.